Right, on to the final application, number 11, item number 11 on the agenda, car park Raleigh Gardens. And, Officer Lewis, could you please present the scheme? Thank you.
Oops. Chair, members, if I can firstly refer members to the modification sheet. There's been a little bit of tidying up that's needed to be done on drawing reference numbers on this. If I can just take you down to the photographs of the site again. I'll wait for it's sorry to keep you waiting. The site is known as the Raleigh Gardens car park. It lies just on the south side of the relief road that goes around Mitcham Town Centre. It's an area that has been used for parking, but has been closed more recently. Again, if I can just highlight in the report, the site is identified for housing. Again, this is something where the principle of the site for housing use is being considered, but it's not in the statutory local plan as yet. You'll see there are again flats to the south of the site with walk-up balconies and walkways in front of them. The balconies do create a degree of overshadowing to the windows, and that's relevant in terms of some of the other considerations of the impact of the proposals on neighbours, which I'll explain as we go through this. You'll see there that towards the far end of the site, we have the flank wall of one of the blocks which abuts the site, and the windows that you can see in the photograph do in fact provide one of two sources of natural light to living rooms. So if you walk around to the front of the building, you'll see similar sash windows. Again, looking across the site towards I think Standor House, which fronts onto London Road. Again, another shot of well, they were former offices, but planning permission has been granted to erect another 2 stories on this block and an adjoining block to be converted into flats. So yeah, you can see this is the building beyond the edge of the site, where, like I said, permission's been granted for 2 additional floors over this, and permission's also been granted for 2 additional floors over the building here. So a general approach to sort of what might clumsily be referred to as densification in the town centre. If I can again give you a bit more context, you see quite a number of quite nice trees along the frontage of the site, but trees which really have grown up with no particular landscaping objective, other than it would seem to obscure a large area of tarmac which provides the car park. They haven't been sort of planted to create an avenue of trees. They don't have a particular historic significance in the town. Again, I think relevant to the overall assessment of the application. Again, a view looking into the site, and again, showing a number of quite nice trees. Again, looking back towards the flats. And the flats, in fact, form the very edge of one of the sub-areas of the Mitcham Cricket Green Conservation area. So again, that's something that I'll come on to later. If I can just take you back up to the start of the images again here. So the proposals are to build on the car park. As I've said in respect of the Elm Nursery car park, there is capacity, significant capacity in public car parking in Mitcham Town Centre. So again, this is a site where the council are supportive of releasing the land from car parking use. Status a little different from that in the Elm Nursery planning application, not part of the statutory local plan yet, but certainly a site which has been identified for housing in the draft plan. You'll see again the building mass has been broken up to retain a bay which can be used for servicing the block which currently exists but wouldn't be removed. This has produced an irregular shape to the block, but in so doing, I would suggest breaks up the overall mass of the building. The proposals are for 5 and 6 story blocks. The dwellings would all be pitched to provide private rented flats. In terms of their design and appearance, in terms of the design, they've been designed to be dual aspect units. If you can see, if we're sort of working around here, we've got flats that face this way and this direction, this direction, and this direction, this direction, and this direction. And again, breaking up this block in the middle actually helps with configuring a scheme that enhances the number of potential dual aspect flats within the scheme. Officers acknowledge that there are a significant number of trees to be removed, but also that there is ample opportunity to provide replacement trees on the site. If I can draw members' attention just briefly to paragraph 710.3 of the officers' report on page 305 of this evening's agenda. The council's, the tree officer within the planning service has reviewed the proposals with regard to the removal of the trees, hasn't raised objection, is concerned perhaps that the prominence of some of the replacement trees won't be as great as those that are to be removed. But again, this is something which can be reviewed if members feel that additional planting is required to mitigate for the loss of the existing trees. In terms of the impact on the conservation area, as I've said, if we go back to the site itself, the red line here that the cursor is tracing forms the very edge of one of the sub areas in Mitcham Cricket Green Conservation Area, with the vast majority of that conservation area lying to the south of this building. And given the images that I've shown, the photographs that I've shown you of this block, again, officers are of the view that introducing a building of this particular scale in this instance would have a neutral impact on the conservation area. The views of the conservation area are restricted by the presence of trees along this boundary in any event, and it would seem somewhat perverse to limit the development of this site on the basis of those limited views. If views of this building were considered to be very important, it would require a complete sort of rejig of the development on the site. The mix of units, again, the officers' comments are similar to those in other reports. The proposals introduce a number of smaller units into Mitcham, which is an area which is characterised by a lot of family housing. It's also characterised increasingly by a number of rented units, and this proposal would introduce more rented accommodation. But as we've said, there are benefits here insofar as if new blocks are properly managed, we actually have an opportunity to deliver good quality rented accommodation, meeting a need in the market, and perhaps avoid some of the pitfalls which may have come across the desks of our environmental health officers with perhaps poorly managed houses in multiple occupation. The site's adjacent to a controlled parking zone, so there's potential to make the scheme permit free. But again, being within the town centre, that's not so much of an issue because there are alternative means of accessing other destinations. Refuse and servicing arrangements are considered to be acceptable. And again, as part of the package of 4 proposals, this particular scheme is recommended for approval, subject to the completion of a suitable legal mechanism to ensure the delivery of affordable housing and other planning benefits as part of the 4 developments before you this evening. Thank you.
Jonathan, thank you. Would you be able to remove the screen, please? Thank you. On to the first speaker, Tony Burton. Are you there? Yes, Tony, you have 3 minutes.
Hi again, I'm Tony Burton, Secretary of Mitcham Cricket Green Community and Heritage, the Civic Society for this part of Mitcham. We regret having to oppose this planning application by our own local authority. The car park is a suitable site for new development, but we agree with Merton's planning policies that its central location requires retail as well as residential use. We also support Merton's role in providing more affordable homes. We cannot conceive why it is failing to do this. No affordable homes are planned for this site, and across all 4 Merton schemes, there is a 43% shortfall in what is being provided. Planning policy is clear. Providing affordable homes on other sites can only be done in, quote, exceptional circumstances. There are none, and at least 40% of the new homes should be affordable. Currently, only 14% of what is being built in Merton is affordable. Merton Council's own development company should be setting the standard, not bending the rules. Our principal objection lies in the overbearing height and mass of what is proposed. Your own design review panel says the site will be, quote, overdeveloped, and we agree. Mitcham retained the village character, and new development should respect this. The elevations are monolithic, and the efforts to give the appearance of 2 separate blocks simply do not work. The design approach is poor and universal. It is, frankly, pitiful that Merton's only response to this criticism has been to remove the pitched roof. The architects had hailed this as being integral to their design. So either they didn't believe their earlier statements, or the current proposals are inferior for, in their own analysis, not being distinctive, not reducing the mass of the buildings, lacking variation, creating an unsuitable facade, failing to respect local context, having ungenerous ceiling heights, and not responding to nearby roof forms. This brings us to the shocking impact of the plans on Glebe Court. This much admired development, recently added to Cricket Green Conservation Area, should have been the inspiration for Merton. Instead, we find ourselves sharing the view of the design review panel that the scheme will create a, quote, canyon effect between the two buildings. And then we learn that 55% of Glebe Court's windows facing the new development will not meet official guidelines for daylight, and 29% will be, quote, subject to noticeable losses. I will say that again. Merton Council's own development company is planning to deprive more than half of Merton Council's residents facing one of its new buildings of their minimum level of daylight. These plans are in conflict with planning policy. They harm the conservation area. They fail to provide affordable homes or shops. They set a damaging precedent for the scale of building in Mitcham's village centre, and they deprive residents of daylight. We know that Merton Council turning down a planning application from Merton Council cannot be easy. We also hope that you will approach the decision with an independent mind. And unlike the Cannon scheme, if you don't support it, you won't vote for it. These plans should be rejected.
Thank you. Next speaker I have is Sandra Vogel. Sandra, you there? Could you unmute your microphone, please?
My best. There we go.
You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Sandra Vogel. I'm Secretary of Mitcham Society, and I'm speaking to you tonight to ask you to refuse planning permission for this application. So what has been said, Merton's your own development company. It's yours, councillors, it's yours. You will be giving permission, if you give permission for this scheme, to breach your own planning policies, to proceed with a poor quality design, and to take away daylight from a significant number of residents of Glebe Court. You have to think about that. In all consciousness, you have to think about that. Should you not require your own development company to set the highest design standards, to comply with your own planning policies, to set the best examples for others to follow? Let's talk about design and density. This is a significant overdevelopment of the site. That point was made strongly by your own design review panel, the people you asked to provide oversight using their collective expertise. 5 and 6 stories are simply more than the site can bear. Your design review panel gave the scheme an amber rating not once, but twice. It never gave it a good to go green rating. The first effort for this design had a pitched roof. The design and access statement references it repeatedly, including that it, quote, breaks down the mass of each building element and creates an interesting roofline that picks up on a number of buildings in the local context. The design and access statement is peppered with similar references. Yet this pitched roof is gone, and so all those bold design claims are also gone. Now there's nothing to break up the massing, just a blocky, Lego blocky design. This is oppressively tall, built in dark brick, out of character with its surroundings, and like I said, a significant overdevelopment. Now I want to talk about light. This development will significantly block daylight for residents of Glebe Court. It's been said by the previous speaker, 29% of windows will be subject to noticeable losses, 29%, almost 1 in 3.
1 minute left.
The officer's report takes the same line as the architect. Both try to minimise the significance of this by saying these rooms are bedrooms and kitchens, suggesting their need for light is less. But especially now, when we have all been forced to stay at home for weeks on end, we understand that people need to use their rooms flexibly. Would you be okay with a noticeable loss of light in your own home caused by a new development? If not, why would you sanction it for the residents of Glebe Court? I'd like to talk about Merton playing fast and loose with providing affordable homes on site, but I haven't got time for that. I'm going to ask you to stop, think and refuse this application, which has had 3 times more objections than any of the other Merton schemes you've talked about tonight. 3 times more. Stop, think, refuse this application. think again, get Merton to think again, and come up with a scheme that's fit for Mitcham, fair to the residents of Glebe Court, and sets the right kinds of standards that others can aspire to.
Thank you, Sandra, thank you very much. Philip Dunphy and Louise Scannell, you have 6 minutes between the two of you. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah.
Are you going to share the 6 minutes?
Yeah, we will. I mean, we probably won't use all the 6 minutes, but we'll.
Okay.
I'll start off on some of the more planning-related comments, and then I'll just get Louise to jump in on a couple of design-related comments.
Okay, you have 6 minutes.
Great, thank you. Just, I suppose, running through the common themes of the two speakers in terms of the issues that they've raised or the concerns they've raised. On the subject of the potential for the site to accommodate an element of retail, it's important, first of all, for Merton to make sure they're not putting in place within the scheme a commercial use that they don't believe is viable and they don't believe would be occupied. Their primary objective is to deliver housing. The site itself is outside of the main shopping area, the main shopping street of Mitcham Town Centre, and the site is adjacent to existing residential use. So in that context, the site is allocated for residential. We believe that's the most successful solution for the site and creates the necessary environment and activity onto the street. In terms of no affordable homes, I guess we probably discussed at length to an extent so far how we have a joined up approach when it comes to affordable housing delivery, which means that we're consolidating that affordable housing delivery on the Elm Nursery car park site, therefore freeing up the opportunity that would exist on this site to deliver build to rent housing in a very highly accessible town centre location. So I think it's probably, hopefully members are pretty clear on that strategy. In terms of Glebe Court and daylight and sunlight, there was a reference to the potential creation of a canyon effect between our scheme and Glebe Court. I guess it's probably worth just highlighting that at the closest pinch point, we're 18 meters away from Glebe Court, and that expands to nearly 21 meters. There is a kind of a return element on the western side where it's about 9.5. That elevation doesn't have any active habitable space. It's largely a kind of an inactive gable elevation, so there isn't really any issues with privacy there. On daylight and sunlight, it obviously is a big concern, and you know, we totally appreciate the nature of that concern. However, it's important to note the existing site comprises a completely open site at present. It's a completely undeveloped car park site. Therefore, the residents of Glebe Court experience a completely unobstructed level of daylight and sunlight. That would never be expected in a built-up town centre location like this. And as such, the loss of daylight, there's always going to be an element of loss of daylight as a result of the introduction of a building onto this site. And it's really about the extent of impact, and is that an acceptable extent of impact? And an important consideration in that respect is that the main habitable elements of Glebe Court face to the south, away from our site. The main living rooms and the main bedrooms face to the south. And then the elevation facing to our site is occupied by a mixture of kitchens, bathrooms, and some secondary bedrooms, all of which are deemed to be less critical in terms of receiving natural daylight. And it's important to make the distinction. Yes, there in BRE terms, there's a noticeable change, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily a negative change. It's basically bringing Glebe Court into a town centre urban setting and the normal expectations that any resident would have within that town centre setting. So in BRE, cold BRE terms, yes, there's a noticeable change, but it's still bringing it to a level that it's an acceptable change. And then on the issue of height, you know, we certainly don't think this site is representative of overdevelopment. If you were to apply the London density guide, for example, you would be able to potentially achieve up to 700 habitable rooms per hectare on this site because it's a town centre site. We're 600 habitable rooms, so we're below that. We're in a highly accessible location. We're optimizing the use of the site. We're consistent with some of the existing sites and certainly many of the proposed or emerging heights that are coming forward on sites around us. So we're not setting a tone of higher buildings here. This is consistent with what's happening and emerging in this area. I just kind of like to hand over quickly to Louise, just in terms of the design approach, and particularly how we move from pitch to flat roof design, and how we feel that still is a very, very successful design. And Louise can touch.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. So yeah, I'll pick up on a few comments that were made by the speakers. So one of the points was on the kind of bulk and massing of the proposed development. I guess hopefully you've seen from the drawings that were included in the pack and presented that great care has been created or taken to create a high quality addition to Raleigh Gardens. So you'll see that we've broken the massing into two smaller elements to avoid the appearance of a wall along Raleigh Gardens, and we've used a kind of a layered brick grid to the elevations and kind of different grouping across the two buildings to further break down those two individual blocks. Picking up on the point about the pitched roofs, so originally the scheme did have pitched roofs, but as with all the schemes, they've been developed in consultation with obviously the DRP, the public, the planning officers, and it was actually a recommendation by planning officers that potentially the pitched roof added unnecessary height. So we did revisit the design, looked at removing the roofs, but it wasn't simply a case of removing the roofs. When we did that, we did look at further design changes to kind of further enhance the design of the building. So we made modifications to the groupings of the brick grid to add further kind of dynamic or dynamism across the building facades and further interest.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Officer Lewis, would you want to make any comments, or do you want to respond?
Yeah, if I may, I don't want to say too much. If I can just share the screen a second. If I can draw, this is one of the CGIs which is in the applicant's various submissions. And you'll see this is going back to the point about scale and bulk and massing. So we've got this site on the edge of a pretty substantial town centre relief road. And what the applicant has helpfully done here is actually drawn in, where the cursor is moving, the two extra floors of accommodation which have been approved on the buildings to the east of the site. So we've got 5, 6, and then 6 as we turn the corner into London Road. Granted, the building in the foreground here is significantly smaller, but are we really saying that the building needs to be sort of, slavishly stepped up story by story across the site? The other point which Philip made relates to daylighting, and this was a point which Sandra Vogel had raised. Again, just to put a bit of context in here, if I can ask members to have a look at page 300, paragraph 7.4.6 in the officers' report. And what officers have highlighted there is that the design of the Glebe Court buildings is such, with the overhanging walkways, that feature already limits the light to the windows. It creates a degree of shading of daylight to those windows. So in a sense, the design of that building already builds in something which is going to mean that even if you put something more modest in scale on this site, seemingly in terms of the maths, it would have quite a negative impact. But it's really because you've got those walkways which you can't do anything about, which project beyond the facade of the building, that you start off from a position which generates a bit of a problem. Then going on to the other point which Philip Dunphy raised, is it reasonable to look at a site like this and fetter its effective development by saying simply because there's nothing on the land adjacent to it, which doesn't form part of the curtilage of that building, that we've then got to restrict development opportunities on that site. So there are a number of factors which are pushing in different directions here. And I don't think it's simply a case of slavishly saying, because it fails to meet this particular building research establishment target on daylighting, that in this particular instance, we've got to say, no, this scheme isn't right. Because like I said, you're starting from a low benchmark in the first place because of the restrictions on light arising from those walkways. In terms of the viability and the affordable housing, as I've said in the introduction, in the overarching report, what we're looking at here is a package of 4 proposals. And whilst this, as with the other schemes, doesn't deliver on the affordable housing agenda, it does diversify the housing stock, providing what could be good quality private rented accommodation, properly managed. And in terms of the overall viability package, I draw members back to the benefits from one of the earlier schemes. But as I've said, each scheme can be considered on its merits, but there are consequences if one of the schemes falls at this evening's committee meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I've written speech from Councillor Owen Pritchard. So, Louise, I'd be grateful if you could read that, please.
Thank you, Chair. I write to the committee on the issue of the proposed development on Raleigh Gardens car park in Cricket Green. I recognise wholeheartedly the need to build homes in Merton and also agree with the repurposing of the site from its current use. Whilst I understand the concerns of residents about the size of the development and the resultant loss of light to flats in immediate proximity, I remain in favour of the proposal. The positives outweigh the negatives. That said, some of my residents, particularly those who live in Glebe Court, are opposed to it. I have therefore given the remaining part of this statement over to them. What follows was written by the Secretary of the Glebe Court Management Organisation, Lucy Hedden. Like Owen, we are in favour of housing plans, but the plans for Raleigh Gardens car park are too large, dark and dense. Glebe Court is a well-designed estate with one block 232 to 264 having a border approximately 20 metres from the car park wall, with one small area approximately 8 metres away. The estate is visually pleasant, built with pale bricks, whereas the planned building for Raleigh Gardens car park is too dense, too high and dark and overwhelming. The design review panel stated this is an overdevelopment. Only 45% of Glebe Court windows facing the new development will meet the criteria for levels of sunlight and daylight in the official guidelines, and a quarter will have considerable losses. These flats already lose approximately 10% of daylight from the walkways. We are not against housing development, but at 5 to 6 stories, the proposal is too high. 3 to 4 stories with a more sympathetic design would be more acceptable. The pitched roof was central to the design, but has now been changed to a flat roof. This makes it look even larger and uglier. The planned building is much too large and dark for a small area and too high and close to the nearest block in Glebe Court.
1 minute remaining.
All developments need to respect and enhance the local character of the area in which it is located and contributes to Merton's sense of place. This proposal does not.
Thank you, Louise. Right, so with no more speakers, I'd like to go on to questions from the members. Any questions? Councillor Lanning.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a question about the DRP notes from the October meeting. I know that the pitched roof was addressed after this, but I just wondered whether the applicant did anything about the comments around the bathroom. So the bottom of page 291 says where bathrooms faced external walls, opportunity should be taken to insert windows, just whether there was anything done about that. And I suppose just a question about the overdevelopment. So that comment, was that addressed at any point after that DRP meeting? Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Chair, if I can just share the screen again. The issue of the pitched roofs on the site, that was something which Philip Dunphy and Louise Scanlon did acknowledge had been at the suggestion of planning officers. Again, I think if there'd been perhaps, I'm just sorry. Okay. If we were looking at a building which was much lower and your eye could read the roofscape of that building, perhaps with that of the terrace beyond, I think that's perhaps a little misleading, because if you're a pedestrian at street level, you're not really going to appreciate that. But if you're appreciating this and then looking onwards to a new building, which was perhaps 3 stories, you might reasonably expect some echo, some rhythm, some reference to that kind of detail. But having a well-engineered brick parapet around the top of the building is something which is commonly used in many modern flatted developments. And again, going back to the image of the site, I think if this was executed in good quality facing bricks, would really look quite crisp and smart and attractive in the town centre. Going back to your point about the bathrooms, did you say on the?
Yeah, it's just the bottom of page 291. The DRP sort of comment said that where the bathrooms faced external walls, opportunity should be taken to insert windows. It was just a question as to whether that comment was taken on board, if possible.
Yeah, certainly the layouts that we've got here have got. Can you see? We've got bathrooms within the building. So what the designers have done, they've created layouts with the greatest number of either habitable rooms or rooms that would benefit from natural light, such as a kitchen area around the exterior of the building, and then uses within the flats where some form of mechanical ventilation can be employed, have been placed integrally on the layout. So it's quite a practical layout in that sense, as long as the residents or as long as the designers ensure that those spaces are properly mechanically ventilated. So yes, I mean, they have been designed to be within the envelope of the building rather than on the exterior, which then enables a better penetration of natural light to the usable spaces.
Thank you, Jonathan. Any further questions? Councillor Making. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, I've just I see the transport person's gone. I was about to talk about PTALs again. The residents in London Road keep complaining to me that they've got nowhere to park now because they park in Raleigh Gardens and they don't know where they're going to go in future. Because of the introduction of CPZ in Langdale, which is opposite on the other side of London Road, the nearest parking space would be the Simcoe Road car park. For visitors, it's fine, but if you're living in the road and leaving your car there overnight, that's not going to be really good. The alternative, of course, is St Mark's car park. But the reason that people don't use St Mark's, as was stated in the Elm Road application, is that it's basically derelict and needs refurbishing and loads of money spent on it, etc. That's why people don't use it. So what plan is there for the officers for the residents in London Road to be able to park somewhere else? Has this even been considered? That's one issue. I've got a few. Right, that'll do to start with. Have a nice start, please.
Sorry, Councillor Macon, I only got one question. You said you had some others.
I'll find them.
Okay.
That one's going to take a long time to answer.
Okay, could I ask Transport Officer Sarath, would you be able to answer the question on details, please?
Your Chair, can you hear me, Chair? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead.
We got multi-story car parks in Marks Roach where a number of levels has been closed off. It's been poor anyway, but there is a possibility for parking. Mind you, it's still we got a P-4, which is a very sustainable location. So that's what we are. Our policy is for them. Anybody who's need parking will have to use a multi-story car park at St Mark's Roach car park.
Thank you, Sarath. Councillor Macon?
I understand there's P-4, and therefore the residents of this block shouldn't get parking space anyway. But there's residents in London Road that have parking space, that did have parking spaces until CPZ was introduced, and they used to park in Raleigh Gardens quite often and pay the council an enormous amount of money to park there. But if we're saying that they can't do that anymore, which they obviously won't be able to do with the building here, something has to be done, as far as I'm concerned, with the St Mark's car park, because it's not fit for purpose. Anyway, that's my comment. The other comment is it'll be interesting because Sadiq's cousin lives in Standor House, so he's the one that keeps talking to me about parking. Okay. That's the main issue. The other issue is about the light. I understand what was said about the light being affected by the balconies in the block anyway, plus the trees. I don't see it as a big problem in some ways. I think I am concerned with what the residents think, but I believe that Owen's right in what he said, and I would expect to support him.
So were those comments or questions?
I've done my questions, I've done comments, and
okay, all right. I presume no further questions. Any questions from anyone, or can I go on to comments? Right. Any comments from members, please? Councillor Ward.
I think it's unusual to have a planning application in a ward where two members of the planning committee are the representatives of that ward, and a representation was made by Owen, Councillor Pritchard, the other representative of the ward. So all three ward members have commented and have recognised there are problems, but all three, I believe, are saying that they will support this recommendation. And I think that is really important. One, in how we as councillors who are also on planning committee balance when the views we get from residents when applications are in our own ward, but also look at the wider picture in terms of the delivery of affordable housing across the borough. I think it's a credit to all three members of representing Cricket Green Ward for the how they've listened to the residents, but come to the conclusion that we should pass this tonight. And I believe that's what we should do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. With no more, Councillor Dehaney, and then Councillor Southgate. So if I can make that the last one, then please, Councillor Dehaney.
I use that car park regularly, and I see that photograph that came up. I could spot my car there. And it's a well-used car park, particularly during the Christmas period. If my memory serves me right, I think we reduce the parking fee or allow free parking there over the Christmas period, simply to attract more shoppers in Mitcham Town Centre. Now, if we think that car park is so important to bringing more shoppers in Mitcham Town Centre during the Christmas period, yet we're going to build on it. I think that's a wrong decision. Mind you, I don't say I'm going to vote against it, but I don't agree with this building on the right Gardens car park.
Thank you, Councillor Dehaney. Councillor Southgate.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we're really conflicted on this one, aren't we? It is to my way of thinking, the least successful of the four schemes we've looked at. As I look at the CGI, I mean, it doesn't really make the kind of contribution to the public realm that you would hope for at this fairly prominent location. It does appear overdeveloped relative to Glebe Court, and there are these, I mean, I know we try and finesse our way out of them to say, well, they're only kitchens, or there's enough light at the sink when the housewife is doing the washing up. But there's an awful lot of justification for things that are just, frankly, not what we want in terms of daylight and sunlight. So I don't feel I can support it. But then we're in the web, aren't we, of this is one of four, and the whole affordable housing component is integral with that package of all four. So I'm not in a position I'm going to support it, but I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Councillor Henry, and then the final one, Councillor Dean after these.
Sorry, Chair. Would it help if I showed the image again?
Can I?
Let me go through the comments, and then I'll come finally back to you before we go into the vote or a recommendation.
Okay.
Councillor Henry?
Okay. Can I please ask the transport officer if the St. Mark's, the Morrison car park belongs to the council, and if it's not, what action the council going to take to help to ensure that it's secure? Because at the moment you have like people sleeping in that car park. It's not safe, and also people don't use it during the evening time because it's very much unsafe and unkept.
We're actually on comments, but I will allow that final question. Sarath, would you be able to quickly answer that before I?
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, can you hear me? We have to consider and see what we can do in this. We are not. I cannot give an answer today, but we'll look for any improvements that is feasible.
Okay, thank you. And finally, Councillor Dean.
Yes, sorry to take up time here. Anyone that's been in Glebe Court will realise it's fantastic. The homes are wonderful, and I'm assuming at some stage the council had some involvement in that. But there are properties around Mitcham which are appalling, and if we are saying that we have to compromise on Glebe Court, which is what a lot of people aspire to build this, again, we shouldn't just put some homes together on that basis. And Councillor Southgate, you've got to remember that we mustn't look at 3 other applications and say we have to pass this because of the other ones. These are not planning considerations at all. Frankly, it's not reasonable for Glebe Court, and the council need to look again at this proposal.
Okay, Right. Before I go into the vote, would either Councillor Southgate or Councillor Dean want to put a recommendation forward, or should I just go directly onto the vote? Go on, Councillor Ward.
Yes, no, with respect, Chair, I think it should come to one of us who says, I think I propose that we pass this recommendation and move to the vote. Thank you.
No, that's your call. Councillor Southgate, did you want to move a recommendation, or shall we go?
No, Chair. I said I feel conflicted, but okay. I'm not for the reasons that Councillor Dean has pinpointed. You know.
Okay, that's fine. We'll go to the vote, and we'll do it as a roll call. So, Louise, would you be able to? Louise.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Christie.
For the recommendation.
Yes. Councillor Christie, for. Thank you. Councillor Dean.
Against.
Councillor Dehaney.
For.
Councillor Henry.
For.
Councillor Lanning.
For.
Councillor Makin.
For.
Councillor McGrath.
For.
Councillor Southgate.
Not voting.
Councillor Ward.
For.
And Councillor Latif.
Not voting.
Thank you. That's 7 for, 1 against, and 2 not voting.
Thank you. So that's approved. Thank you. Right.